Hello, Monday World Economic News, and we'll start with Business Insider Money Game and an article entitled "Look What Happened the Last 10 Times Japan Got a Ratings Downgrade." And the opening chart on the website there just below is 20 days beforehand and the 20 days after the downgrade came, and as you can see, generally nothing much happens. Credit write-downs gives us an article which is quite long and complex. I've pulled this bit out because it fits in with what I'm talking about. The recession is over, but the depression has just begun, is what he said in October 2009. He goes on here. The point is that it is never going to be politically feasible to run deficits that are double-digit percentages of GDP while printing money to keep the economy afloat and stimulate aggregate demand for long. It's not politically feasible, 10% deficits as a percentage of GDP. It wasn't possible in Japan. That's Richard Koo shouting that, which is why they always sought to rein in their deficits, precipitating another recession. It isn't possible for the UK or the US either. Politically, it's not going to be possible. We don't think. One can make all sorts of intellectual arguments that this is what should be done until we hit full employment, etc., but politically, I don't see it. That's why the structural issues have to be dealt with swiftly. Now, this is obviously complicated structural issues, and we won't go into it here, but that is what has to be dealt with, and that is what won't be dealt with. I credit Obama in the US for taking the better path and debit Cameron in Britain for forcing excessive cuts on the UK much too early. Now note that although these cuts are talked about and they're being talked of here, they are very small. And I believe it's about 5% of the increase of the deficit. It's not. It's no bigger than that. I mean, you've got your spending here, the deficit above it this much, and that deficit is increasing upwards. And that deficit now is just brought down 5%. The angle of it. That all the spending's still there, and most all of the deficit is still there. Its projection outward has just been dragged down slightly. It is very, very small, but it is causing an awful lot of fuss and real economic damage. And I think the potential double dip for the UK is not about weather. No, we don't think that either, do we? The poor British economy is also about austerity. The different outcome in the US and the similar outcome in Ireland point in this direction. In other words, the US is still go, spend, $1.5 trillion deficit. And Ireland points what happens if you stop that go spending. Things go poop. And UK are stopping the spending, and already things look very poopy. In Ireland, we get to this next article. Leo Varadkar was asked on prime time what Ireland's opposition Fine Gael would be saying to the European Commission at their meeting today in Brussels. So the opposition, who are obviously penciled in to take over, are being sounded by the EU. Leo Varadkar said, "They will be saying that Ireland does not want to pay, that we do not want to take responsibility for our sovereign debt. They are going to be saying that it is a European problem, not just an Irish problem, that there are flaws in the system in Europe. We are making it very clear to them, which is very important, that at the current rate of 6% we won't be able to pay. If they insist on this deal and this interest rate, there will come a point when Ireland won't be able to honour its debt." Well, Leo, that's fair enough to start where you were at the end of that argument, but you started by saying they will be saying that Ireland does not want to pay. And if you started with that line of argument, you're ruined. And you'll never even get to the end bit where you say we can't pay. I'd invert those around the other way and then just forget the idea that you don't want to pay. Just forget about it completely. Deal on the fact that you can't pay. The Telegraph gives us austerity preferable to Euro breakup, says German Chancellor Angela Merkel. Pay cuts, pension reforms and austerity drives are preferable to a breakup of the euro, which threatens peacefulness in the region. Peacefulness, my arse. Echoing President Sarkozy's comment on Thursday about the brutal wars of the 20th century, Ms. Merkel said at the World Economic Forum in Davos, many countries should resort to some very hard policies, but we should never fall back into the same old habits of the past. We need to prevent that happening. It is the embodiment of Europe today. Should the euro fail, Europe will fail. We are going to defend the euro. Pretending that Europe will slip into another world war or kick off another world war if the euro fails is not ingenious, it's disingenuous. And how many times have we come across these politicians that say, should the euro fail, Europe will fail, we are going to defend the euro. Normally before whatever they say they're going to defend to the end falls down. Methinks she protests too much. Back to Business Insider Money Game and Morgan Stanley on the Shibor explosion and what it means for China's banks. That Shibor is the Eastern equivalent of the Euribor and the stuff that went mad in 2008. And this is from Morgan Stanley. It's a bit technical, but we'll get the idea. It's only 5 lines. This suggests to us that besides the systemic liquidity tightness, some banks may be more vulnerable to continued escalation of tightening measures from the PBOC to control inflation. I'll move on. What's worrying is that this is only the beginning of the tightening cycle for China, and already some of its banks seem in ill shape to handle it. That hard landing theory may have a little more ground to stand on if this is true. It was the banks that blew 10 years ago that put China in real difficulty, and if they blow again, they will be blowing with a much bigger boom. Alia gives us China's secret currency basket. The currency basket China uses as a gauge for settling the value of the yuan is made up of about 20 currencies, split equally between those of developed and emerging economies, China's top central bank was quoted as saying in a state media publication. China rating agency blames the US for credit war. This is bollocks. China are just being very naughty and trying to cover it up by all sorts of blah blah. They are the naughty ones. Clear on Money gives us transfer of title problems show up in MBS investor lawsuit. I won't give you the whole of this, but obviously it's to do with mortgage-backed securities and how the paperwork at the people end of mortgages and Inabit via the banks wasn't done properly, and it's leading to trouble. I'll just give you the last 2 lines of this because it sums the situation up well. I do not doubt that if the administration can bail the banks out of this one, they will do so. But as things are going now, it looks like a significant problem that will take years to resolve. Those 2 things sound about right. If the government can change things so it's not a problem, I'm sure they will. Otherwise, this is just going to roll on and on and on. FT gives us, be careful what you wish for in the Arab world. The unrest in Egypt, Tunisia and Yemen, and indeed the governing turmoil in Iraq, highlight a critical problem in how the West deals with fractured and failing states. To date, there has been too much focus on demonstrations and too little on the fact that changes in regimes that do not deal with the underlying causes of the protests are simply going to substitute one form of failed regime for another. Which is fair enough comment, but that one I went through quickly. Was highlight the critical problem of how the West deals with fractured and failing states. What's it got to do with them? Obviously a lot, but how much should it have to do with them? I'll read one more chapter out of this, one more paragraph. These Arab states have young and growing populations, all lack the employment and job creation to serve their people. All have infrastructures that cannot meet popular needs. All have failed to shape their economies in ways that translate growth, to the extent it takes place, into equitable income distribution. All have relied too much on their internal security services. All have failed to address the causes of internal violence, extremism and terrorism. All have distorted their budgets and economies by a focus on security at the expense of governance. May be true. But besides the demographic changes, is that the West not a pot calling a kettle black? Watch this space. Have a good week. Bye.